So when it comes to the different water using equipment, we're going to focus on different ones out there. Obviously, we don't have time to go over every single water using equipment that's out there, but really just to look at some of the common ones that you see throughout most of the buildings that are out there, but also some of the different specialized water using equipment, some of the new inventions that people have come out with, just to kind of give you a taste of the different things that are out there. Okay. So when it comes to water using equipment that you see a lot of times with a lot of the processing, so depending on the facility and so forth, you may see a lot of the general equipment that's used throughout the building and so forth for different purposes. Could be for climate control, could be for certain processes that they're doing, certain pieces of equipment that they're applying it to, and so forth. So when it comes to some of the water using equipment that you generally will find in some of the bigger industrial, commercial buildings and so forth, looking at things like cooling towers, chillers, boilers, heat exchangers, water heaters, water softeners. So we're going to look at, focus on some of the general equipment that you see in there. And like I said, later on, we'll focus on some of the specialized equipment that you may see out there. So first of all, in regards to cooling towers, really the key thing with the cooling tower is the fact that the basic thing it's doing is just cooling water. So part of the process is that there is a basin in the cooling tower that collects that cool water. And that basin that collects that cool water, the water in that basin is then pumped into the facility, into different water using equipment to cool the equipment and so forth. So you'll see that out of the basin, there's usually a pump system. Out of that pump system, it'll pump that cool water into the building, into the equipment. Once it's used, then it gets heated up because it cooled that piece of equipment. Then it'll come back, return over to the cooling tower. When it returns over to the cooling tower, it then gets cooled off, and then it kind of goes through that recirculating process where it takes cool water, cools the equipment, brings it back, heat it, cools it off again, and so forth. Okay, and when it comes to cooling tower, also as we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of different designs, different types that are out there. Just showing you some examples of the different types of cooling towers that are out there. So different brands, depending on the company, depending on the design, depending on the capacity. Some may be as small as a table. Some may be bigger, depending, again, on the capacity, what you need, and so forth. So there are different designs of cooling tower. The basic operation of the cooling tower is the same, but again, depending on the manufacturer, the model, the capacity, all that kind of stuff, you have different designs for the cooling tower. As we said, sometimes as small as a table, sometimes a little bit bigger in capacity because of the amount of cool water that's being used in the facility. We've seen some that are as big as a building itself. So just realize that there are different ones that are out there. I always say the key thing is, again, focus on the water line. So I know a lot of times when people are looking at cooling towers, sometimes they get intimidated because sometimes even the size of that particular piece of equipment could be pretty intimidating. But again, focus on the water line. That is one of the key things we tell a lot of specialists, a lot of inspectors to do. And sometimes even the capacity may be so great that they may have several of them all in one. So this big one that you see here, in some facilities, you may have multiple cooling towers of that size throughout that facility. So just realize, depending on the capacity, depending on what they need it for, there may be many water cooling towers out there. Okay. Key thing is, as we said, the process is to cool that water so that when it goes into the building, into the equipment, it's going to cool the equipment that's in the building. Once it cools, that water gets heated up again, and it gets sent back over to the cooling tower to recool that water. Most of the ones you'll see out there will be vents on the cooling tower as part of the cooling process. So you have some of these that have a natural draft, where as the heated water goes down the vents, just the air that's flowing through the vents will cool that water enough to the point where it then goes down into the basin and stored in the basin, and then from there it's pumped back into the building for the equipment and so forth. So it just goes through that recirculating process of taking the cool water, running it in, that cool water gets heated, send it back, cool it again, and so forth.